Hi, welcome to this episode of Integrate or Die. My name's Steve Hunt.
And I'm Jordan Katz.
So, in this episode, we spoke with Maria Colacurcio, and she's working on technology to look at issues of both pay equity, promotion equity, career equity, and really using technology to solve a very specific and major societal issues. So, Jordan, what were some of the things you took away from our conversation?
Well, I found it really interesting understanding how pay for equity can still live in a world where it's pay for performance,
Hmm.
and how you can make sure that you're treating people in the right manner, and compensating people in the right way, eliminating biases, while also, staying true to the focus of the organization, which is let's all perform and crush all our goals, right? I also found it really interesting when we're talking about pay for performance culture at different organizations, but then leveraging data to truly understand whether their pay for performance or really just pay for negotiation.
Yeah.
And we talked the lights out in this one, and we did it in a roundtable format, a little bit different than everything else. And I thought it was really fun and really effective.
It was, yeah. Maria actually was close to where Jordan and I were for this episode, so we got together, and then yeah, then the lights went out at one point, but we kept on going. We're not going to stop.
Yes, we cannot be stopped.
No, I found this was really fascinating use of technology. One of the things, and not just analyzing for pay equity, but also using data to allow people to explain how the company makes pay decisions. And she shared information from like recruiters and managers, so they actually had the tools to credibly explain why there were differences in pay, which I'll tell you, a lot of people struggle to do. They saw much greater pay equity. It wasn't necessarily, they're not paying, and she stressed this, pay equity is not paying everyone the same amount. It's paying people based on the contributions. The other thing that definitely got into our whole concept of integrate or die on this was she said that their ability for their technology to really create an effective pay equity in organizations is dependent on companies actually having good measures of performance or good measures of skills. Because she said one of the big things that influences pay is the market value of the skills that employees have. And so, this need that if we want to move to more of a truly pay equitable world, we can use the technology to identify it, but to explain it, make good decisions, we need better performance data. We need better skills data. So, great conversation with that. Let's welcome Maria to the show. Well, Maria, welcome to the show in our special live interactive format. This is the first time we've done this. We're quite excited about this. So we always start this why we invited you on to Integrate or Die. And the reason is that you work for Syndio, which is a company that makes a really interesting, highly specialized technology in the HR technology field around understanding equity, particularly in pay and maybe in other areas as well. So that's kind of how we describe you. But how would you describe yourself? What is your background in the field of HR technology? And what do you kind of consider yourself an expert in?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this test case in person. I love it. So yes, I am the CEO of Syndio, and we have a workplace equity platform. So what that means is we help enterprises primarily figure out how to prevent pay and opportunity gaps that are because of something like gender, race, or ethnicity. So it's really looking at how do we optimize our comp. And when we think about workplace equity, you often hear about it mostly from the perspective of the employee. So how do you make sure things are fair and equitable for the employee? And most of the time, these conversations center around pay. But what we're starting to see in the landscape, particularly with some of the compulsory reporting requirements as pay transparency takes hold, is that it's expanding beyond pay. It's really about pay. It's about opportunity. It's about advancement. And how are companies making sure that they're taking the reins and applying data and analytics to make sure they're looking at these things from the employee perspective? The second part of it for Syndio and what we look at is what's fair and equitable for the employer, because it's a relationship. It's the employer and the employee. And so when you think about making sure employees have fair and equitable advancement opportunities, pay packages, things of that nature, the employer wants to make sure that those pay policies, those advancement policies, why people are paid what they're paid, why they're getting promoted, are actually also consistent and are driving the types of things that push the business forward. So if tenure is really important, for example, and they know that tenured employees really drive better business practices, push through financial incentives, make the business a better business, let's make sure as a company we're paying more for that. So it's really about kind of unlocking in this era of transparency Why do companies pay what they pay? And is it fair, equitable, and consistent for the employee, but also for the company?
Got it.
That's really interesting because I mean, you just said look sort of two sides of it. You talk about like pay equity. There's pay equity based on demographics, and you don't want bias, but there's also pay equity based on performance and contribution that are higher performers. Most people would argue, at least business people would argue, that somebody who contributes more should get more rewards from the company. And so, but looking at that, and so I kind of want to look at both of those. The second one is really fascinating for a second, though, before we go to the first one in demographics. How then do you look at performance? Because the big challenge of pay for performance usually is not measuring the pay, it's measuring the performance.
Exactly. So one of the things that we do that's interesting, and it's changing so fast, and you all have experienced this, I'm sure. I know I have, which is performance reviews are in, now they're out, now they're back in, now they're out, now they're back in. And I think it's this consistent sort of rip and replace that we've seen HR teams do because they can't ensure that they're doing performance reviews in a way that actually does eradicate bias because there's so much bias in the subjectivity and discretion that often creep into performance reviews. And so what we're able to do when performance reviews have a numerical value, so you're scoring someone on a 0 to 5, and maybe you're doing potential ratings and performance ratings, we can actually look at that and identify, are there biases in those ratings? So look at it from a perspective of what would you predict and what would you expect to happen from a statistical lens? And is that actually playing out? So do you have bias in your performance reviews, in your potential reviews? And then how can you take a step back and say, okay, if performance is one of the reasons why we pay what we pay, so we want to be a pay for performance culture, we want to be a pay for performance company. We hear that, by the way, all the time. And most companies say that they are, and a couple actually are,
Right.
But fewer than you would think. In order to say we pay for performance, that's one of the reasons why we pay what we pay. You have to first make sure that your performance and potential ratings are free of bias. And so we help our companies do both. We help them look at those ratings, make sure that they're not getting into deep water in terms of having too much discretion drive those ratings. And then when they say, we want to use our performance ratings as a control to run a pay equity analysis. So we actually want to use that as a way to explain why people are paid what they're paid, which is completely lawful. They can do that in a way that's above board and they feel really good about.
Yeah. I think I have actually two questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first question is, what do you do if you find your performance ratings are biased? I assume you don't just rerun another performance rating cycle. Everyone would quit. What do you do if you find there's bias in the performance ratings?
So that's one of the things that software plays a really big role in, and where, you mentioned we've got sort of the specialized look. And I really do think, just like we think about selection tools and all the work that we've done around selection, making sure you're getting the right talent in the door, our solution sort of picks up from that very point. We take the baton to now help our companies guide the discretion in all this decision making from all the points that happen after. How much do we offer this person in pay? How do we rate this person's performance? How do we look under the hood at our pay policies to ensure they're working? So in the case of the question you asked, there would be analytics coming from our software to show, where is this happening in the company? Is it because of a specific manager? Is it because a certain policy isn't working the way that we want? Is it because our organization is actually rewarding different things and those aren't the things that were showing up? And we can see that in outliers. There's all these outliers that look a certain way or that have certain skills or capability sets that tend to be the ones that are predicted to make a certain amount, but are actually making more. So it's a lot of trend detection and things like that they can dig in on.
And my next, there's a quick one. Don't you worry. My company says it's a pay for performance company.
Yep.
What's the other side, right? What are the other types of companies? Is there another type? I
think so many companies are pay for negotiation. They don't realize it.
Yeah.
So they say they're pay for performance. They say that they're pay for tenure, experience, or education. But our software will reveal in the pay policy analytics that actually in this particular group where you're telling your people that you so highly value their PhD, but actually men with masters are making more consistently than women with PhDs. So you're actually not paying for that education. And in many cases, the HR professionals, the people leaders, they have a sense that this is kind of going on,
Mhm.
but it just takes those visualizations of data around the policies to really show them, oh my gosh, now I have what I need to go fix these policies and make sure that I'm remediating from a policy perspective.
So it sounds like what the technology really done, because I used to do pay equity and EO adverse impact, and I used to design selection systems, and it's incredibly complicated statistics. There's so many things you have to control for. So it sounds like what the technology really done is done what sort of expert statisticians used to do, and you've made an automated tool that does it more powerfully. When the first question that we like to ask is, when you look at the technology that you've built, that you're like, why isn't everyone using this? Is there's like a certain technology that like, look, this makes so much complete sense. I don't know why anyone wouldn't use it. Not necessarily that they would use Syndio, but they would use this functionality. Is there a certain technology here where you're just like, come on, people, everyone should use this?
I feel like I say that every day
Yeah.
because, and more so when we find ourselves in situations like Equal Pay Day is coming up,
Mhm.
or International Women's Day,
Mhm.
or Women's History Month. We're in it right now. So on Equal Pay Day, there's sort of this kickoff of the season of Equal Pay Days, because the first one is really just about the disparity for white women.
Right.
So then as you move forward throughout the year, Black women have it even worse in terms of the cents on the dollar disparity.
Sure.
And you just keep going
You
down.
know who has it the worst? Hispanic women.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're the very
To a Latino.
okay. So you understand this. So I think where I get the most frustrated is where we stand around and we talk about Equal Pay Day, or we stand around talking about the pay gap and how we're not going to be able to close it for 200 years. And to your question, that's when I feel like I want to tear my hair out and say, it's not that difficult.
Right.
It really is just applying analysis that, yes, used to be backward facing,
Right.
one and done, cumbersome, expensive, working with outside counsel, lawyers,
Mhm.
and consultants, things like that. And you would go back and forth on the data for 6 months. And by the time you got your list of people to pay to remediate, it was all out of date. And you had already created new issues anyway, because starting pay has a huge impact on pay equity. So you've hired a bunch of people in between. But now that there's innovation and technology to solve this, you look at the pay gap and you're like, we should be able to make so much progress against this if companies could adopt technology and do this in a way that's preventative.
Yeah.
It shouldn't take 200 years because it could take literally 0 years.
Literally 0 years.
I'm not married to a Latina. However, I am married, and my wife one time got a raise before she even started her new job.
Mhm.
She negotiated salary. She had, whatever month before she was starting, and then she got a letter saying your new salary is X, because they normalize salary ranges because they're a law firm and they're smart about that sort of thing, but also small, compact, easy to change. But any company could normalize and run analyses.
Because your wife's a lawyer and it's pay for negotiation. Is that what you said literally in her life?
I will say, if my wife got compensated on how many times she wins negotiations against me, she would be richer than Zuckerberg, right?
But
She's amazing, the greatest negotiator, arguer of all time.
well, it's actually a good point, because one of the things that I've noticed in our industry is there's a lot of dialogue around, well, let's just teach women how to be better negotiators. And my take on that has always been, it's really incumbent upon the employer to make sure they're paying for what they say they're paying for, and that they're analyzing pay to make sure there aren't disparities because of gender, versus saying, let's go make sure women can negotiate more. Because back to our original kind of conversation, there's actually research that shows if women, and or specifically Black women, show up and are really advocating on behalf of themselves in a salary negotiation, there's a lot of cases where they don't end up getting the job at all because they're perceived a certain way. And so sometimes this advice can be well-intentioned but not land.
Yeah, I think that the fact that you're bringing performance in here is really, really powerful too, because the concern is when you're looking at pay equity, you never want a perception of, oh, that person's paid more because they're a, whatever demographic it is. And and pay equity is not paying everyone the same. But it's making sure that we're paying based on performance, in which case there might be differences in performance, but you could explain why there is that difference, as opposed to the other concern is just somebody being afraid to have any differences in pay, lest they're being perceived as being biased. So I think the ways you're looking at both of those is sort of balancing what is a very difficult decision if you're the person who has to justify a pay decision.
That's exactly right. It's not unlawful to pay people differently. And so if you think about, there are reasons why we pay what we pay, and there are
Right.
things that we value. And that's also why you have to think about, how do we make this easier for the employers so that they can prioritize, but also execute and take action on those things that are going to drive their business forward, and be really consistent about that. And one of the things we saw during 2020 and 2021, where this incredible compression was happening, because companies were creating new pay equity issues because the labor market was so tight. And again, going back to starting pay is one of the biggest factors. So if you fixed your pay equity in a backward looking way using the old method, we did our analysis last year, we're going to do another one next year, but now we've got our recruiters and our people managers hiring a bunch of folks at these audacious rates, and we're also hiring in engineering maybe disproportionately men, or whatever that looks like. You're creating pay equity issues with every single hire. So one of the things our software does is we put in the hands of the frontline a recommended range that is it's a combination of competitive market pay side by side with, what do people in your company who have those same skills and experiences, again, reasons why you pay what you pay, and then it recommends a range within which to stay, so that you're abiding by that market range, but also staying within the bounds of pay equity.
So this makes so much sense. I think that also, as you're talking about it, that someone had said, if we wanted true pay equity, we just make pay completely transparent, because it would drive a lot of very difficult conversations, but we would get pay equity. But the reason companies don't do this is because of those difficult conversations. But the technology now said, look, there's a way we can do this in a managed way, where we're making it transparent in a controlled way, as opposed to in a highly public way. So I think it's really fascinating. I think that the other thing, though, that you're talking about, which is that ability to explain it. So I'm curious, in this technology, does it enable managers to explain pay more effectively if there is perceived inequity, and they're like, no, it's not inequity, it's this person's paid more because the market rate of this type of job or whatever like that? How's the technology helping with that, the explanation part?
It's so with the salary range legislation that started rolling out a couple of years ago, it started in Colorado and accelerated very quickly. And a lot of folks thought at first, well, what's the big deal? You're posting a range, a good faith range for new jobs that you're advertising. But what it's done is it's cracked open, exactly as you put it, pay explainability, this nut. And what we all know is that people managers oftentimes, particularly in enterprise companies, are not well equipped to articulate what are the pay policies and why are you paid what what you're paid. And now they've got candidates coming to the table, and recruiters on the front line are having to explain to these candidates, well, where am I going to be in the range I would expect with my experience? I'm going to be at the top of the range. Isn't that right? And so that's exactly what our software does, is it gives folks not just the range within which to stay, but how to articulate the policies. So we have one customer, Elevance Health, that's rolled this out to 200 recruiters. And what they found when they rolled out this technology to the recruiters is they decreased the remediation by 25%. We expected that because now you're, again, preventing those new pay equity issues from popping up.
Got it.
What we didn't expect was they actually, oh, wow,
We'll fix that in post.
unexpected. I love it. We'll do it in the darkness.
We'll keep going. This is the challenge of doing this live.
I like it.
All right. Well, we've turned on the mood lighting.
Since we've been talking for 6 hours now.
I will say it's not
It's
that
not bad.
bad.
It's not that bad. We'll keep on it.
Let's see if we.
So the point was with Elevance Health, they decreased their remediation. They don't have to keep fixing whack-a-mole pay equity issues that pop up. But the interesting thing was they actually accelerated time to fill.
Of course.
And they acceptance rate went up. And we're like, why? And when we spoke to the team, it was because the confidence of the recruiters, they were like, I finally have something to say in these conversations, and I get to convey to the candidate that we don't just go off market pay. So they're coming in trying to negotiate. Well, it's not just about market. It's also about, what do our people make today and how do we make sure it's fair? So now you've got these candidates coming in saying, I kind of already trust this company because I know when they're hiring someone under me, they're going to be looking at my pay and why am I paid what I'm paid, and make sure it's not just competitive, but it's also fair.
And well, there's a process optimization element here too, because as someone who has worked in tech for a while and as a result had to find new jobs every once in a while, I cannot tell you how many times I've gone through a process, asked them about pay range. We don't really have a budget yet, they say. You get to the end, everybody's excited, and then they come out with the number, and it's like, I told you already what my potential number was, or I didn't, and we're so far off that it's a non-starter. And everyone has wasted so much time.
I think it is. It's really, as you're talking, it's like not just about detection, pay equity issues, but the explanation and explanation. And the
Huge.
whole concept of pay as a motivator is predicated on people's belief that they can influence their pay, but you can't influence your pay if you don't know how pay decisions are even made. So it's just providing a lot more transparency on that. The next question is, we talk about what's cool and works with his technology, but also as you go in this, what about things you've seen in this area of pay equity that people shouldn't be doing? Is there technology applications you're like, including maybe stuff you guys tried that didn't work out, or that you've seen that you're like, there's a right way to use technology to drive pay equity, and there's probably a wrong way too. Have you seen any
Totally.
wrong ways?
Yeah, I think the wrong ways that we're seeing are companies that are coming in, and because this market sort of blew up a couple of years ago, in particular with pay transparency legislation. When we started this thing, and Zev co-founded the company back in 2017, it was really usurping from consultants, law firms, people that were doing this manually as consultants. But then as we started to see acceleration in some of these laws, a lot of folks wanted to throw their hat in the ring and apply technology to this. And I think in part, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we led the way. And I think a lot of folks saw that, okay, there is a market here for technology, and enterprises are going to be willing to make the change. And I think some of the folks that have jumped in from a tech perspective have really underestimated the sophistication and what it takes to do this well. And so thinking about it from the perspective of being able to serve an enterprise and really understanding, what does that data look like that you're absorbing? What does the data transformation look like? How are you getting your hands on? Is it using age as a proxy for experience? Is it, using start date? How are we doing the groupings? Are the groupings being done in a way that's above board? Are we enabling folks to kind of gerrymander the data, or squint at it, or disaggregate to make the group so tiny that it sort of erases all of the issues? So I think there's a lot of sophistication that went into us building a best-in-class solution, because we had, in the original days, we had JDs, we had labor economists, we had lawyers, we had people looking at this that could really infuse that expertise into product. So I would say just beware of technology companies that kind of jump in and want to do this sort of with tech and aren't able to really explain or tell a story about, how would this though stand up if you were sued? Do you have confidence that this software could stand up in a court of law?
Could you explain it?
Don't skip the hard first steps.
Yeah, well, I think this, this applies so much in this age of machine learning right now. People throw in machine learning, pattern recognition algorithms, and you, just because the data produces something doesn't mean you can explain that it's justifiable, and that you kind of building that expertise into the solution is really critical. So the next question is, as you're looking at this space and you're doing it, what do you wish someone else would build that would make your solution more effective? Because the problem you're trying to solve is a huge problem in society. There's the equity legal side, but there's also the motivation and people being paid fairly from a motivation standpoint. When you look at other technologies, though, because this whole idea of like integration, are there other technologies you're like, I wish somebody would, we're not going to build it, but I wish somebody would build something that would do this?
Yeah, I think a skills ontology that's actually like validated and work. So if you think about what companies want, they want to pay for performance. And what that means in today's day and age is they want to pay more for certain skills that are more valuable. And I think there's so much talk about skills-based pay, but I have yet to see a really solid skills ontology that a company, an enterprise company, could have within their HCM or HRIS that could be absorbed or sucked in when we're doing a pay equity analysis to say, okay, these are the hot skills. And so we're going to pay more for engineers who have AI or ML right now. And that's okay. And that's how we're going to run our analysis. But a lot of our customers just don't have that clean skills-based ontology yet. And I would love to see someone solve that. We're not going to solve it, but if there was something that could roll out to enterprise companies to help them identify and sort of label and tag their people with the skills that matter, that would be huge.
I was going to ask, I'd like to ask, define skills that matter. How do we get to that? What does that even mean? there's lots of skills ontologies out there. Why aren't they fitting the bill for you?
Yeah, I think we're just not seeing them from the perspective of company-wide in a way that when you ask the question, so this is one of the reasons why you pay what you pay, and are you going to stand behind that?
Yeah.
It gets very squishy. And so I think the one area where we are seeing it more is things that are appropriate to engineering. So like that AI ML experience. I think that's
Easy to measure, easy to track, clear data.
easy.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can flip a toggle that says, does this candidate have hot skills
Yes.
or not? And those are the
how's their code quality? What's their productivity? What's,
You probably see that in healthcare, I imagine, too.
Healthcare is another industry that's coming a little more ways for that. But I think that would also help with this sort of rip and replace of performance reviews. Are they in or are they out? Like if companies could actually depend upon that information, because if you think about companies who, let's say, have paid top dollar for Java based engineers.
Yeah.
Are those still the skills that they want to be paying top dollar for today?
Yeah.
No.
Probably not.
Yeah, that's a question that I was wondering as you're talking about this, because on skills and paying for skills, the value of skills goes up and down considerably over time. Do you think we're going to get, well, I say historically, pay never goes down. And we actually, not just for companies, we have our whole financial systems are based on your salaries always going to go up, your loans for your home. Everything is based on this idea that pay never goes down, which doesn't make any sense if you think about like market base of skills. Yeah. Do you think, or have you seen companies that are starting to say, no, pay can go down? Because now what happens is companies will go, okay, your pay is going to stay, and then we're going to get rid of you entirely, as opposed to, hey, your value is going down sort of over time. Do you think,
or we've made a big variable comp change that is either so confusing that no one understands it, and then it surprises them when that goes down, or people get commissions or bonus cuts.
Yeah,
it's the salary that is constant.
Because pay historically has not been like a normal market of going up and down.
No, and I agree. I think what you see most commonly is what you're describing, which is we're going to do a we're going to redo our job architecture and our leveling structure, and we're going to redo that. Oh, and then comes the layoff, and then comes sort of the reset and the rehiring against that new architecture and leveling structure. And I think that's what we've seen traditionally. But I think with some of these skills-based, performance-based, I think you could start to see or imagine a world in which, you know, you're a developer, you have these great skills in Java or Go or Kubernetes or whatever the programs are. But in order to maintain the pay range you're at, you've really got to start doing some work and learning these other things. And maybe there's a period upon which you as the employee have the opportunity to go get those skills, and employers start offering opportunities to do that, like a guild, you know, to their retail customers, offering them skills.
You're right, though. It requires a curated skills ontology that is specifically linked to the outcomes, impacts, KPIs within a specific organization.
Yeah.
It's very hard. It would be mildly difficult, I would say, to use something general and say, here's how your pay that fluctuates. You got to keep upping your skills to make it level.
I guess I know more than the average bear when it comes to skills ontologies.
Is it out there?
It is. I think what it is. But it's interesting. Skills ontology is the exact same thing you said about your system when it comes to pay equity. That skills ontologies require a lot of expertise into them, and when companies implement them, there is a tremendous amount of subject matter expertise to get them to that point where it's like, okay, we're not just using some ONET skills thing fed into that. It's like, no, it's our company's skills ontology. So I think we're going to get there. But it's not going to be purely through technology. It's going to be putting a lot of expertise, the same way that your solution has a lot of expertise in it, and probably continuing to feed into it. So the last kind of question that we get into, we kind of like hit a lot. This is like, and this is cool. This is why we did this podcast. 100%. It's technology like this that you're like, it's addressing major societal issues and really making a difference and moving forward. The last question, though, is if you look at career guidance, you know, when you were young, did you like, gee, when I grow up, I want to be the CEO of a company that does pay equity technology? And guessing not. What advice would you give to somebody like, do you see this as a growing area of HR technology? Because it's a pretty specialized niche that you're in. What do you think is the future of this? is there like a whole field of what you might call equity technology that would go beyond just pay, or what do you how do you see this progressing? Is it something somebody could consider as a career?
So what we're seeing with our customers and, Fortune 3000 companies, they are starting to get specialized roles within comp that look at pay transparency is one that we're seeing over and over again. And I think in part that's because of the EU directive. The EU directive on pay transparency passed after a decade of debate, and it requires disclosure for any companies that have a set of employees in any of the 27 jurisdictions of the EU. Around the unadjusted gap, which is a combination of pay equity and opportunity equity. So advancement and movement and like for like. And so with that, a lot of the states in the US are starting to add addendums to their pay transparency legislation, sort of mimicking that, saying, yeah, unadjusted gap, that's in ours too. Companies need to start disclosing that. So I think if you push this out from a predictive perspective, 5 years from now, most companies are going to have to proactively disclose what's our unadjusted gap, maybe adjusted, which is pay equity like for like, and unadjusted, which again reflects, are all your men up here and your women here? It's movement, it's advancement and promotion. So if you think about that, all companies are going to have to start disclosing this. I think there is a really interesting field here for enterprise companies around pay transparency, people analytics as it's applied to HR. So you see big companies having oftentimes development and analytics staffs that are applying to their own HR function and making sure they're using analytics to perfect those different processes. I think you're going to see more of that. And I really do think you're going to see continuation of these pay transparency, pay equity roles that live probably in comp under total rewards.
I think that's great. It's funny because as a psychologist looking at comp plans, I often have said to people, these make no sense from a psychological standpoint. They're basically a financial exercise and a wish list, and employees don't understand how they work. And so I just love this idea of a combination of technology, societal change, not just around equity, but the motivational value of pay, and really leveraging it effectively, because Lord knows traditionally it's not been done truly as a tool for motivation. It's more almost a what can we get away with kind of thing.
Yeah, and when companies are, particularly right now, because companies are not yet being forced to make these disclosures. And what we're finding is when they do, and they do so voluntarily, whether it's their EO disclosure or if it's their unadjusted gap, or even going to their company and saying, we're going to look at pay equity and we commit to, we're going to reveal a summary of our findings. They're seeing that the engagement goes up. They're seeing that the attrition rates, particularly around women, are decreasing. They're seeing that they are then staying or becoming a great place to work, which we know has ties to the financial outcomes of the company. So I think leaders, as they start to see this as a mechanism for creating a certain type of culture, and that's going to be able to tie to the business outcomes, I think we'll see more of the right behavior.
I know it's anecdotal, but I've been through companies that have done this, and it is a phenomenal way to change culture for the better, right? It's very difficult to change the culture of a company, but when you actively reconfigure who's where within an organization as a result of actual performance instead of, inherent subconscious biases, then you can feel a palpable change. And both times I've been through it, it's been for a net major positive.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so the last question that we have is are there questions that we should be asking about HR technology that we haven't? What is a question that you think we should ask, and then you have to answer it?
Oh, okay.
And if you don't, we're never leaving. This podcast goes on forever.
It's been 9 hours, guys. I gotta pee.
Sun's gone down, yeah.
I think the question, or the really interesting thing is, and it goes back to the title of your podcast, Integrate or Die. I think HR tech has gone through these cycles of all-in-one point solution, marketplace ecosystem, all-in-one, what's happening. And I think from a motivation perspective, what I would be asking leaders in HR tech is, how do we create technology solutions that enable systemic HR and build organizations from the perspective of breaking down those silos? So like, quick example, when we talk about our solution that's on the front lines, giving recruiters the ability to articulate the pay policies in a way that gives candidates confidence in the company, That sits under talent. But what we've just done is create this amazing bridge between comp and talent under the CHRO, because now comp has a partner with an aligned purpose. There's finally someone who wants to help me articulate why our pay policies are what they are. And talent wants to understand that and now has to figure out a way to roll that out to their team in order to hit this aligned purpose of making sure the pay policies are doing what the company wants and rolling that back up to the head of HR. So I just think the question we should be asking is, how is your solution bringing functions within HR together, whether it's talent acquisition, talent management, compensation, total rewards, promotion, advancement, learning and development? How are we creating solutions that bring all of those functions together under the CHRO in a way that has an aligned purpose versus creating little silos? And I think sometimes as technologists, we do that unintentionally. We create a really great solution that silos that function and creates benefit for that function, but isolates it from the whole picture.
Yeah, that's a great point. For example, your solution might people say it's a comp solution, but it's not really a comp solution. It's an engagement solution. It's it's a lot of things beyond that, and sort of breaking those silos down. I think that's a really important point. And really, it's kind of what we're looking for is this idea. I think a lot of it is the technology companies realizing that we need to integrate with other technologies that thinking differently. And so definitely sounds like you're doing that. Well, thank you so much for appearing on the show. Fascinating technology you're building, and really just have enjoyed learning about what you guys are doing. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
having
much for
me.
coming.
It was fun.